Perfect. Sorry, really quick. Do I just press this button to turn the mic on?
It's on.
Oh, it's on? Hello? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Lisa Kwan. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm currently the policy manager at Family Forward Oregon, where we work to ensure progressive policies to support families. Currently, I ensure equity in our paid family medical leave program implementation. I also work on issues around mental health, childcare, and other policies to advance economic and reproductive justice for mothers and caregivers. And a little bit of background, I was born in Seoul, Korea, and I grew up in Virginia, Hawaii, and Portland, Oregon. And as a daughter of an immigrant single mother, I quickly realized the many barriers that exist for families without robust support systems. Previously, I worked at the Oregon State Capitol as a legislative director and worked on policies around behavioral health and incarcerated women. And I'm very excited to introduce our two amazing panelists. So I'll start by introducing Andrea Peluso. She is the co-founder and executive director at Family Forward Oregon and Family Forward Action. We're an organization founded by Oregon mothers to build economic and political power for mothers and caregivers through grassroots organizing and campaigns to change policies and systems that perpetuate economic insecurity amongst mothers and caregivers. Andrea has also worked to lead campaigns for paid family and medical leave, affordable childcare, equal pay, paid sick time, pregnancy accommodations. The list goes on and on. She's also worked in public policy, nonprofit management, public education, and community health. And Andrea is the mother of two kids, ages 15 and 17. And next, our second panelist is Leslie Barnes. Leslie is the current director of the Preschool and Early Learning Division with the Multnomah County Department of Human Services. PELD is responsible for the implementation of Preschool for All and leading the effort with racial equity as a founding principle. Leslie is a fourth-generation Oregonian. She's also an Army veteran and has a degree in human development from Warner Pacific College. And Leslie has over 25 years of experience as an early childhood entrepreneur, coach, mentor, and national presenter, so she understands the business of childcare as a mother of 4 adult children. So thank you so much to both our panelists, and with that, I will get started with our questions. So for our first question, it's kind of a broad question on just what is Preschool for All and how does that impact families. Can you explain what does this policy and program mean and how does it impact our community?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Thanks for having me tonight. I think what I'll start with is some of the framing of the benefits of preschool. I'm not sure who the audience is, and so I'll go ahead and start with a little bit of a formalized presentation, very short, and then we'll go into answering some of the questions. And so I hope we all know what the benefits of preschool is, but some of us don't. And so it improves school readiness for grade level reading, improves equitable access and success for children least served currently. It returns a $7 to $10 for every dollar spent, return on investment. Yields a higher lifetime of earnings, better health outcomes for preschool participants, lower rates of involvement with justice system, and that's kind of interrupting the preschool to prison pipeline, as you may have heard. One of the challenges that we had in our particular area is that we were the 4th most expensive childcare in the United States. Only 15% of preschool children could be in publicly funded slots. Preschool teachers are making half of the median kindergarten teacher's salary. There's a severe shortage of preschool facilities and qualified teachers, and that's certainly been exacerbated when COVID reared its ugly head. And so what we endeavor to do is build a free and voluntary quality universal preschool for all 3 and 4-year-olds in Multnomah County. And there's this trilemma, as they call it, of affordability, quality, and living wages. And so how that came about was a marginally tiered income tax on higher income earners who live and work in Multnomah County. And that was passed in November of 2020 with an overwhelming 64% of voters saying yes. And I will say when it passed, I was shocked, right? And I'm sure some of you might have watched on TV. I was like, this is really happening with all the things that were happening and the uncertainty that COVID brought. It really showed that people really wanted this and how important and how long we've been waiting for something like this. Some of our key policy elements are, we have a racial equity foundation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to the questions. Universal access, but first access to priority populations. So some kind of tiered universalism is kind of what I call that, targeted universalism. So the curriculums, I get questions about what that looks like. So it'll be aligned with state standards, but it's going to be unique to different kinds of programs, different kinds of lenses, cultural perspectives, and so there won't be any one curriculum that we're pushing in universal preschool in our county. One of the things that we will ensure is a community-based oversight, so there'll be lots of time for feedback, community perspectives. We have an advisory committee that will meet to make sure we're on the right path and making adjustments, as I know we'll need to do. And we'll also be looking at infrastructure support. So that includes brick and mortar buildings. How do we kind of get through the red tape of if someone has a small in-home business, how do they add that egress window? How do they maybe, make changes, small changes to large changes? How do they move from a in-home to a center? How does someone who's developing a property look at, bottom level retail space and think about that as childcare space potentially? So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to address in the system. And so one of the things that's really important is lead teachers will be paid on par with kindergarten teachers. Assistants will be paid at least $18 an hour, and that there's specific guidance about how that will roll out in the future. Establish a compensation matrix that reflects that the assistant teacher wages will be no less than 75% of lead teacher wages by 2035. And so a lot of things need to happen for us to get that, and it's going to take us 10 years to get to universal. And so that means invest in not just preschool for all, but we heard about preschool promise, we heard about OPK, Head Start, all of those things get us to universal. All of those investments in our community get us there, and we have to build a real system that hasn't existed before. So that gives us a frame of what we need to go to, and then we can go into more of a discussion. But just wanted to give some framing of where we are at today.
So kind of going back to my first question, Andrea, did you want to speak on kind of what this policy means and kind of the higher level impact on our communities?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Can you hear me okay? I feel like I need to sit a little closer. We think about at our organization, and we're part of a coalition of organizations, Childcare for Oregon, about kind of the larger childcare system too. So we'll take a minute to just kind of describe what we mean by that and how this fits into that. So when we talk about that, we're talking about the need for really universal care of different types for kids of different ages, for kids from 0 to 13 plus, for some kids who are going to need care beyond 13. And needing to build a comprehensive set of care supports and systems for that whole age group of kids, knowing that kids at different ages need slightly different things. So we were talking before we started about us implementing paid family and medical leave, which is part of a childcare system, because what newborns need is parents who can be home with them. That's the kind of care that's best for them. And that care shifts as you move into infant toddler age or preschool age or school age or beyond, right? So eventually the system that we need needs to be comprehensively addressing the care and education needs of kids across the spectrum. And it also needs to be provided in ways that can support their parents and their whole families in being able to live rich lives. I think we often get trapped into thinking about childcare as like a workforce program, that its primary purpose is to just like help parents stay attached to the workforce. But we've seen, right, through the last couple of years especially, that it has implications way beyond that. It really is one of the things that can support parents and especially mothers in being able to participate in any part of life. So that it needs to serve families' needs too. And then it also needs to really take care of the amazing childcare providers and early educators that are doing some of the most important work that there is and are getting paid the lowest wages of really almost any workforce in the state, in the country. So it needs to be thinking about multiple populations. We need to be creating a system that is mixed delivery. So by that we mean it's provided in lots of different settings by lots of different people. Like, families know best what's best for their children, and they need to have options and choices for what's the best kind of care for me. And we also need care that can be provided in a variety of different ways, because for many parents, what they need, they're going to need multiple kinds of care at once for their kids. So they might have them enrolled in a preschool program, but also need the help of family members on the weekends or in the evenings. And that kind of care should also be compensated. So, for a long, long time, all of this work has really depended on the unpaid, low-paid, and exploited labor of mostly women of color, a lot of immigrant women more recently, and this is work within families that is unpaid and is work that should be compensated, and work in our workforce that's undercompensated. So when we think about this program, part of the reason that we were so excited to get involved in the work for Preschool for All is it's part of that overall system, right? It's a way in which our local community can invest in building a really quality program for part of that spectrum of kids and families that need care. And we're looking for, that system that we need it's gonna cost a lot. That said, not having it also costs us a lot, right? Just in different ways, and the wrong people are paying for it. So this is a way that we see, there need to be investments, pretty robust investments made into building a real system at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. So our county really taking the leadership to fund this part, fund the part that is 3 and 4 year olds in preschool, with some full year and work day kind of slots and things like that are starting to get to broader care needs beyond the kind of typical preschool day, is really significant to starting to then be able to allow us to invest more of the other resources we're raising into infant and toddler care and school age care, and to subsidize the preschool programs that we're running. So eventually we want that long-term thing, that bigger system and kind of longer term system to exist. And this is like a really important slice of that overall pie, I would say.
All right, and I'll jump in a little bit. I think we talked about what it means. I think it means that we're no longer making families navigate this on their own. I feel like, our state in particular, it's kind of been the wild, wild west. You didn't know, what to do, and the wait lists were long and all those things, and people really had to do that on their own. So we're really trying to create a system that works for families. And the thing that I really want to highlight, and it jumps down to one of the other questions, is when we're talking about Black and brown folks that have typically done this work, how do we bring them along in this system? Because typically what happens is you perfect or improve something, it leaves out the people that really were foundational and critical to that work. And so what does it look like to meet those providers where they're at? Because that's where the families want to go. Now, no matter what we change about it, they're going to go to the place that someone they know referred them to, right? It may not look like the thing that we think of as quality. And so how do we honor that commitment in that relationship, right, that the parent wants, and support the provider at being the best provider that they want to be? And that's on their own terms. So we really have to think about how do we allow them to interact with our system in a way that supports them and doesn't push them out. So we don't want to build the McMansions of childcare, right? We want to support the people that families want, right? And so that means we're going to have to probably reimagine what we think quality looks like, and be open to new possibilities around that, to think about what does preschool look like if it happens when the sun goes down, because that's when some families are working. And so we're looking at social emotional supports that can happen at different times of the day, and it doesn't have to look like a little mini second grade classroom, right? And we don't have to turn those homes into those second grade classrooms either. So it really means honoring the work that's happened and really supporting it to be the best it can be. So really for us, it's meeting those providers where they are, and also thinking about larger ways to do that. The schools and the churches that want to do it. So how do we meet all of those kind of players in the system? So yeah, so that's the exciting part. At the county, we've made sure we've made ways for folks to contract with a body like the county and support them in that. I mean, it's kind of intimidating to be a small business owner and try to navigate that kind of system. So we put those supports in place. So we have MISO as a partner that's helping providers think about business and not have to interact with us directly. We have the CCRNR that's helping those providers too. So we're just trying to like design and figure out where people are and how to have them be successful really in this. So it's really an intentional design, which I think is unique. That is not easy either. So there's no cookie cutter. We'd like to have had 5,000 slots this first year, but we had 500. That's because there's an intentional rollout to this, and we know that there's lots of investment that needs to happen in relationship building and trust, right? We have to have providers trust us as partners at the county, whereas governments and a lot of communities are not trustworthy partners. So we're trying to build that relationship and bring folks along.
Touched on so many things, but you kind of touched on providers, which is a good segue to our next question. So can you speak a little bit on what this program means for early childhood workers and providers? I know you're kind of already started, but would love to learn more.
I mean, I think what it means is we're going to have to listen to the many parts of this system, the folks that work in classrooms, the owners. All of those people are really important parties in that. And so how do we think about, retaining folks? Because, people will tell you right now it's very hard to attract a workforce in any kind of work, really, for the most part. So what are the ways we're inviting them and saying, this is real work. There's a career path for you. You can see yourself, even if you don't want to be in a classroom, maybe there's a cohort that introduces you to becoming an administrator or all the hats that we wear in the child care system. So what are the ways that we have peer groups that come together? What are the ways that we give opportunities for more formalized education if people want that? We're not mandating that, though, because we all know that just having a formalized degree doesn't mean you're a great teacher. We've met those teachers probably in our own educational journeys, and so we don't think that necessarily means that you're great. I think when we meet people where they are and give them tools, maybe there's some training, child development, things like that we can give them, but it's meeting those folks where they are. It's really important.
One of the things I really appreciated in the process, I know we'll talk a little bit more about it, but kind of leading up to what became the ballot measure was there was a lot of reflection about the different policy components that would make up this whole program. And a lot of working groups and feedback, and there were parents and providers who were part of shaping that conversation and part of deciding what the sort of terms were for what the policy eventually would be. And it was really important, I think, in that process, exactly what you're saying, that there was a need to really recognize experience in the field, and that there's a real risk whenever you start funding something to scale, right? Whenever a government entity starts investing in something that's been underinvested in before, we risk, I would say, really gentrifying the field. That there's a lot of women of color who've been doing this work on a shoestring for a long time, and then all of a sudden there's money, and it's larger sort of corporate childcare entities that can scoop in and get the resources and get the contracts. And it's not the folks who've been doing the hard work who are going to benefit. And I think there's been a lot of intention to protect against that in the rollout of this system in a really important way, which is part of the reason that it's rolling out slowly and intentionally over time. Because the reality in this sector is that there's scarcity in every part of it, right? Because it's an example in kind of capitalist terms of a market failure, right? This is something where 70+% of the costs of a childcare system have been outsourced to just families to pay. So most of it is not subsidized. Most of it is paid through private tuition. You can imagine a scenario with our public education system if it was only private schools, which is essentially what we've done in early childhood. And most families can't afford that, and so are having to make a lot of compromises to be able to figure out how to arrange care for their kids because they can't afford that. And our teachers are making poverty level wages because the math does not add up, without public investment, without public dollars. But we have to really be careful when we're making those investments that we're creating the system we want and not reinforcing the worst parts of it, which we risk doing when we kind of add money to something without a lot of intention for how it's going to be implemented. So the scarcity exists in the fact that we have so few people working in this sector. We have not invested in the pipelines that we need to create to get more people working in this sector. We don't have enough space, like we don't have enough facilities. There's really very little incentive for someone to build out a childcare facility as a developer. It's more expensive, it's harder to turn over to someone else. Like without us investing in building the space, we've talked to a number of providers through this process who are like, I would grow, but I have no space I can afford to grow into. We're all facing the same kind of rent challenges in the city. So there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be built over time. And as you were talking about, there's been so much intention to really work with a smaller set of providers and really provide a lot of support for how to implement this program and draw the kind of multiple funding streams that exist right now into their programs and work with the kind of business systems in developing those so that you can serve more families and more kids. So there's at all levels, there's a lot of technical assistance and support that's required, and you can kind of see the circle of those who are participating and the families benefiting growing year by year until we get to that universal system. And to the last thing I'll say on the child care worker piece is I just think we have to come in as public government entities and regulate wages and then pay what it costs for a slot based on baking in what you need to be paying providers for them to be earning a family wage, because most of them are parents themselves and need to be earning enough to take care of their own families. So that's not going to happen in an unregulated system. So the more we can bring more public dollars in and say, this is not what the market can bear. We've been paying based on what the market rate is, what people are paying currently. That's not a good way of compensating providers. We need to decide what it costs to provide really great care to kids. What does that cost? What kind of staffing does that require? What kind of facilities does that require? What kind of materials and supplies does that require? And then pay providers based on that, which is increasingly where we're pushing our state to go. Multnomah County has created a lot of positive pressure and example of how we start to do that by setting a compensation structure and a rate structure that actually contemplates paying providers fairly.
We're just looking at workforce in multiple ways, and one of the things I want to highlight is our Pathways program. So Pathways is a way to bring people to the field that may not be there, or maybe they're trying to figure out this preschool for all thing is really a good thing and they're in business and kind of want to learn about it. So we're trying to create this opportunity of coaching, mentoring, thinking about your business as a way to bring people into this pilot opportunity. But we're also thinking about what are the ways we can reach down to high school? What does it look like to introduce this opportunity as a real career to folks? And so we're looking at models that work in the Head Start. They have the CTA program at Albina Head Start. How can we expand something like that? So that's a program that introduces, this work to parents, and then maybe we can take that model and put it in other places. And so, because we really need folks that want to learn about this work and do it well. And so we're trying to think about all the ways we can introduce this to them. And we've heard some really great models. We've looked at a model in Washington that works with Black male teachers specifically, and they've started a program which they start in high school and they look down to 8th grade, and they're looking at preschool as a way, and then paying for college if those folks want to do that. So we're just thinking of all the ways to introduce and sustain that, because what happens is if you're someone that works in this field and you love it, you can't afford to stay. As soon as that position comes available at the elementary school, you take it and you leave those younger kids that I've lost teachers to work at a bar. It's I make a lot more money as a bartender than I do as a teacher. And we just don't want that. We want we want to honor them, and we're saying that you should be giving those teachers benefits. You should be, paid time to plan. Substitutes. That's a big one. We're thinking about what does a substitute pool look like in our state, and how do people get to access that? And so we're working with the state to think that through as well, because we also know too that sites that are desperate, they're hiring off the substitute pool because they're short teachers. And so how do we pay them and so that they want to be in that work too? There's just so many pieces to this work piece part that haven't been really addressed that we really have to do and do well.
I want to touch on why Preschool for All is an intersectional issue. So how does Preschool for All help women of color specifically, and why is childcare work so important as a racial and gender and class justice issue.
Right. So I look at it this way. I look at the people that I've met along my journey that do this work, right? And how they have these rich relationships and were able to work with you on the payment and do all those things that don't serve them well, but serves the community well. And we really want to honor them. But what does it look like to help that woman who's running that business that wants to expand? And so how do we talk to lenders about that? How do we talk to, who do we help them navigate those systems? But I think that when we think about it, we don't want these unintended consequences that typically happen when we expand and do these things. But how do we honor that work and say that relationship building is as important as ABC? Sorry, but that connection and social and emotional support is what really gets them prepared for kindergarten, right? And also I want to say that those families that come, in that setting too, how are they supported? How are they're their child's first teacher, but what is the relationship that they can have with the provider that prepares them for this K-12 space, which we know is typically not welcoming to families of color? And so what are ways that we as a system can help introduce those concepts of what does it look like to sit in a conference with a preschool teacher? And what are the things that you should be asking on behalf of your family and child? If you see something that you don't understand or like, how do you advocate for your family? And so those are skill builds that come and help you through the K-12 side as well. So I really think there's just a lot of ways that we can think about, like, really honoring the work that has come before, because again, I've seen the landscape of this world change since I've been doing it. And I saw many providers of color in business that went out of business, centers that went out of business when other folks saw that they were better connected, could get the loan to get the bright, shiny center where someone else couldn't get that. And as the neighborhood changed, people were going to that place instead of Miss Annie around the corner. So how do we support Miss Annie maintain her business as she would like to have it maintained? So it's really important to honor that.
Yeah, Andrea?
I feel like to talk about this program and how it's different, it's useful to talk about other programs and how they're not accomplishing this. So most of to the degree that we have child care programs, and I think, I can say something more about preschool programs too, but that are publicly supported, they are, our current child care subsidy program was designed out of really racist, sexist welfare reform processes at the national level. So the idea was, we want to cut mothers off of welfare services, and to do that, with a lifetime limit that we have a lifetime limit on services, that to do that, we have to kind of give a nod to the fact that to work, you need childcare. So we're going to do the bare minimum to set up a system that will undercompensate providers and is not stable care for families, and doesn't even actually provide subsidized care for the vast majority of people who qualify. But to qualify, you have to be very, very low income. And not surprisingly, this system is not serving people well at all. It's not serving anyone within it well. The families don't have stable care. They're constantly having to recertify and prove that they're eligible over and over again. The providers are getting compensated based on kids coming to the program, attendance, but not enrollment, and they're being paid substandard wages for it. So it's getting not great results, as you could probably guess. That comes from, and that push for that, right? If anyone kind of has been around long enough or read some of the conversations about welfare reform, that was a very racialized anti-Black movement to try to basically allow for wealthier people to not have to pay into a system they don't want to pay into. And so that's some of the history, right? Some of the history in early education that's different in this program is that it's really been a lot more about assimilation than it's been about care. So it's quality care has been defined as the kind of care that is more hours of the day, removing Black and brown children and low-income children from their homes and putting them into professional settings where they can be prepared for a system that's unjust through their kind of further education system. So that's some of the stuff that we're inheriting as we look to develop something different. And I think in this program, part of what's been so successful about it is that from the very beginning, from the design, we had mothers of color and providers of color participating in the design process, who were part of the leadership team that came up with the plan. They were the first people in meetings that were sort of called on to speak, right? Like, it was very different sort of structure to the overall design. What we've ended up with is a system where there is a plan, as Leslie said, to have sort of a targeted universal implementation approach. So like, the first families who will be eligible will be disproportionately families of color and low-income families. The providers who are going to be sort of recruited first to work within the system are going to be more providers of color and culturally specific providers, because we need to make sure we're also thinking about culture and language and all kinds of other things. The care is designed to be stable. Like, you're not having to reprove that you qualify and are eligible, and the care that the way that providers are compensated is for the care that they're providing, not like, oh, the kid wasn't in attendance that day, so now we're not going to pay you even though you had the slot open for them. And funding a lot of different types of care is really important, and setting standards, like basic standards, like not being able to suspend preschoolers from school, which is a very racialized experience for Black and brown children, being suspended from preschool. And as you said, there's a variety of curriculums, there's a variety of supports and thought about, operating a program with a variety of different sort of cultural needs and standards, not really just about an assimilation system to like white structures. And we're thinking about wages and support to a field of providers who are disproportionately women of color and low-income women themselves. So there's a lot of different ways that I think we've learned from. I think like in preschool programs, there's other states and localities that have implemented preschool programs, and we've kind of seen like what's worked and not worked about that, and where it's exacerbated inequities and where it's reduced them. And I think that Multnomah County's done a good job of really trying to model the best parts of that and create a model maybe for other counties to follow.
Yeah. And other counties are looking at our model and trying to implement it in Clackamas and Washington County. And I think a couple of things struck me there too is, looking at other jurisdictions, what has happened is you'll have a bunch of folks say, wow, they're making more money over in preschool for all, so now I don't want to be an infant toddler teacher anymore. And that's not what we want, right? We want to support, and so we're proposing a subsidy for that too. So if in your center you have infant toddler teachers and you have preschool teachers, there's some money to help augment that wage for them, so they don't feel like they have to leave an age group that they probably love to work with and go to work with preschool, which is maybe not the age group that they excel with. So there's just a lot of thoughtful processes and looking at the unintended consequences of building something like this. And there's a lot to build. There's a whole lot of things that need to be built to do this well.
Andrea kind of touched on a universal childcare system, but for my last question, I kind of want to think beyond Preschool for All, the Preschool for All program in Multnomah County, and kind of talk about what kind of statewide efforts are happening to establish a truly universal childcare system in our state. And then maybe Leslie can also talk about how has Multnomah County's Preschool for All program influenced other counties, because other Washington County, I think, is implementing a Preschool for All program, so it's kind of exciting to think beyond our program.
They're trying to run a ballot measure this fall to pass it, so if you live in Washington County, vote for preschool. I can say at the state, we're doing some stuff, not enough. I think there's been more acknowledgement of how necessary this system is. I think there's more understanding kind of out of COVID among money decision makers that what we always knew, right? Which is like childcare is pretty foundational to everything else. Like nothing else works if you don't have childcare. So I think there's more understanding of that to some degree. The fact that we've, as a state, every state, I mean, we're connected to a bunch of other state organizations too, like the fact that we did receive large amounts of federal COVID aid definitely helped for it to be easier to build public support for investments in childcare, because there's money to spend. And some of it's meant to be dedicated to things like childcare. So we've been able to have some success in some of the foundational things in starting to kind of shift the way some childcare programs are governed, to shift some of the underlying assumptions within some of our childcare programs that make some families eligible or not eligible, in driving some more funding directly to providers for various kind of stabilization grants or expansion grants, or, you know, there's a couple of different pots of money that are out there to kind of help more providers come online or expand their operations, to get like essential worker payments essentially. So there's been some, you know, we've shifted rates so that we're kind of trying to increase rates. We're moving toward more of this kind of cost equality. So there's a couple foundational things, but what it's going to take is actually us raising revenue to the level that we need to invest in really building a more universal system. And that, I think, is going to look like doing it in every county where we can, and doing, you know, running either a legislative or ballot measure effort to raise more revenue at the state level, and really trying to draw down those federal dollars that we thought might come from what was Build Back Better. It is now formerly known as Build Back Better. And that's what it's going to take, is like a lot more resourcing to do all of the things that you're doing in one county, you know, having to really scale building workforce, building facilities, compensating teachers properly, like subsidizing more families to access care. This is just one of those systems where we have to go to scale. Like, we can't just have some subsidized families and build the system that we need for everyone. Like, we have to invest in building that workforce, building those facilities, like building the system that's actually going to be needed to really serve more families. So I feel like we're making progress, we're building political support, we're really trying to make sure that everyone out there who's a voter is saying, like, what are you doing about childcare? Like, this is a political issue, this impacts my family. And winning investments that are adding up to that universal and equitable and, you know, mixed delivery system that we all really want and need.
Yeah, and some of the things that I'm interested in and working on and thinking about with the state is how they're going to implement the expulsion ban that's going to come down the pike, and what are the supports that programs need right now to become ready for that. Because I think there's a fear that, oh, I'm going to be in a space and there's going to be children that I can't, you know. So if that's the fear, what do we do now to get people ready for that? That children are welcomed into spaces, and people understand typical child behavior too, and what are the social and emotional supports that we need for that. You know, and I give feedback a lot because I think sometimes people don't understand how licensing interacts with these systems too, and how bias can influence licensing, just like it does in police work, you know? And how sometimes that violation keeps you out of a system like QRS, for example. And so unless the state really takes a lot of time, and they're expanding, you know, with the DELC coming on board, but what are you having those new licensors know about bias? And, you know, inconsistency in licensing looks like bias if there's not clear rules around. How do I complain if I feel like I'm being treated unfairly? So we're really pushing on what is the system in place for that. If I, as a provider, feel like I'm being treated unfairly, who do I talk to? The licensor's friend who's their supervisor? You know, how does that work? You know, and so we're really talking about, you know, those intentional things. So those things keep you out of QRS if you have these violations, right? Until there's these compounding things that happen because you didn't address the thing that happens in fairness over here. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, but I think the voices, you know, whenever you hear there's an opportunity about, you know, rules, RAC, you know, any of these committees that you could be on, you know, I'm on all of them, but I can't be the only brown person on all of them. I need people to come that are passionate about this work and have their voice be heard. So, I mean, because those and things influence what we do at the county level. And so, you know, I'm excited about opportunities for providers to have their voice be heard in a meaningful way. And so how do we create those opportunities for them so that it's not just, we want feedback from you and you filled out a survey for the 10th time. Like, what is the thing that we're really doing with that data that you're collecting? There's just so much that I think it's starting to happen. I mean, and I've seen a whirlwind of change, you know, COVID, not the last 10 years, it's pretty amazing. But thinking about what else we can do as far as, oh, and I wanted to go back to one of the things you said, Andrea, about, our aims to really prioritize those community groups. And what we saw, because we just got applications closed, and it bared out, 70% of our folks that got those slots are provided people of color, people that said they have children that are experiencing disabilities. So we're happy about that, happy about the provider group that's in there. Out there in East County, where there's more of a childcare desert than a lot of other places. So I'm excited about people that are saying, yeah, I want to do this. I've been doing this, support me to do it more. So I'm excited about, those opportunities, and we need to build more and more and more too. So, there's just so many things to think about, right now that's happening at the state but we need folks to show up with their voice and not feel like it's outside of you. It's really we're the change that we want to see. So I just want to encourage people to find a way to have your voice be heard in this whole system, aligning what we're doing with the state, because those investments that come, we won't get to universal in Multnomah County if we don't have preschool promise. It's not just that funding. If those go away, or if they say, oh, they got it taken care of in Multnomah County, we can take those slots and put them somewhere else, we'll never get there. It includes those too. We paid into that. We still want that. And we have preschool for all. Right.
Right. Like no other counties can fundraise what they need to do this without the state too.
Right. Right. And have the most children of color. So all these investments, the more money, the better, to make this right and done well.
I appreciate that. I should also say, we organize moms and caregivers to fight for childcare. So follow Leslie's advice and join us in Salem and fight for childcare, and also, in Congress, because we can't let them off the hook either.
Love it. I have a lot of other questions, but I think this is a really good opportunity to open it up for questions and answer some of your any concerns or anything else you want to learn about the program. Now is the time. Oh yes, there's a mic in the back.
Well, first, I want to applaud each of you for the work that you're doing, thinking about this so holistically in such innovative ways. It's just amazing to see. I know all the work that has gone into it, but also really how thoughtful you have been in looking at each of the pieces. So I would love, because I really believe in having provider voice there, and having providers really step up into committees and informing and being advisors and all that. But so regular folks like us that are not providers, are there what are some tangible things that we can do to really get involved? Like, you're encouraging involvement, but can you give us some tangible examples of today? What should we do as a next step?
A great question. Ruby is our colleague, by the way, who is also a childcare expert. What are some things that you can do? So you can join organizations like ours that are training people how to advocate, and go to Salem and talk to their federal congressional delegation and make demands. You can vote like childcare is your most important issue, and ask the people who are asking for your vote what they're doing to create a universal childcare system. You can have different conversations in your lives. For so long, this has been one of those issues that is treated in our white male patriarchal capitalist system, racist system, as a personal issue and a personal failure, when it's actually a systemic issue that is getting the very outcomes it was designed to get. And we have to talk about it like that, right? There's been generations of women trying to work who have been told to hide that you have kids, don't talk about the care needs. This stuff needs to be public. We need to be loud. We need to be demanding. We need to talk about what it is that our families deserve, that we deserve, in a really fundamentally different way than just the scraps that we've been given so far. So I think there are a lot of different ways in both kind of the political and advocacy and organizing spaces for folks to really dig in, get involved, ask questions. Some of the people here are students. Talk about this stuff in your classes. Really demand that when you're talking about policy, you're talking about it as how is this Or is it not a racial, gender, and class justice issue? Who is it impacting more? Like, dig in on the specifics, and based on that, how would we design a solution? Who should be part of designing the solution? Ask the questions like, who is benefiting from this the way that it is? Who is losing? Why is that? And how do we start to kind of challenge that, structure and approach increasingly with the way we talk about it, where we put our money, how we vote, how often we show up to advocate for something different.
Everything you said. I had a woman call our office, and again, this is the highest tax bracket in our county, and she was saying, I have these, they just don't get it, and like they're so upset of having to pay this, and and I just don't know what to. I was like, the conversations, maybe we need to get a card to put in your pocket. What do you say when you're up against someone that, I don't have kids, what does this look like? What does the investment mean for the long term for our entire community, to your point? So I've been thinking about those top points that people can have, because we had rumors of people wanting to move out of the county because they didn't want to pay it. They're going to step over so they don't have to pay that. But it's just like, we're investing in our future. And I know that sounds corny to some people, but it's a real thing. And really that investment means so much to those families, that individual child. You're just getting them ready for the world in a new way.
Yeah, when I hear people like that talk, is it on?
I can hear you.
When I hear people like that complain about those taxes, I'm just like, they're really loud and annoying and stupid. So just to start off the thing, I think preschool has been criminally underfunded and given bad attention. I would really appreciate if providers were given far more voice, and that includes the ability to unionize. When I was growing up in France, the teachers were not unhappy and they went on strike. Now, people who weren't unable to join committees, who didn't feel like their vote mattered or didn't involve, they would still be in the street and they would march with them. So if there was a bunch of teachers marching down the street, I would join them. And although there'd be Fox News going crazy, we just can't listen to those people. They don't matter. We got very serious issues to take care of. So I want to put my voice to that. Sorry to give you a statement instead of a question. The other statement that I have is, so my children have been in private and in Helen Gordon, and the private institution had an owner who was incredibly charming. And then later on, we heard how she treated her workers. When you talk with them, there's a potential that they're not adding any value at all. And I don't want you to be charmed by them. The real people that are really important are the ones who are putting in their fingers and putting the work in and support the children by supporting the provider. And so, sorry for the statements. Thank you for being here.
I love that statement. I've been having the privilege of meeting all the providers. I did like 32 site visits in the last few days. And there were some teachers like, how do we know that the owner's paying us? How do we? And I was like, we need to have a space in which peers can talk. It's not just, providing training, but where's the community of practice? Where's the peer support? Where's the way? So, I said, well, here's all our stuff is public, so you should know what you should be paid. But yeah, to your point, we're usually talking to the person that's signing the contract and not the person directly in the classroom. So I think we're trying to think about the ways to have that be intentional and to make sure, that those teachers are part of this process too, and their voice is really heard.
Yeah, if you're not communicating directly with them, you're communicating with their representative. Someone they voted for.
Right.
To be their
Right.
voice.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say too, and should have mentioned before, so appreciate the flag, absolutely feel like all of the childcare workforce should be unionized. We need to work in that direction increasingly also because if we move toward there being more public dollars, which there should be, to support childcare wages, then really we need the unions, which exist now, because there are unions that support childcare providers now, very small segments of the overall workforce. But when they are the ones that are negotiating their pay through our public childcare subsidy program. So and there are a lot of models that we've looked at with home care and other things where where increasingly the public dollars are subsidizing the slots, the providers need a voice and a way to negotiate with the state for like how they're setting what those rates and wages are going to be. And that's hard to do without the power of a union, essentially. So like, I think it's absolutely true that more and more of the workforce needs to be unionized and have a voice. And that like, when we talk about having a voice, we really mean all different kinds of providers, that it's not just center owners at the table, but also staff and the teachers in the classroom, that we also mean home-based providers and not just centers, that we also mean in the childcare system, less so in preschool, but the friend and family and neighbor providers who should be compensated for the childcare work that they're also doing to care for the children in their lives. So we need a system that's doing all of that, and for all of those folks to have voices in the process.
Hi, thank you both, all three of you. I have a question about implementation. What have you found is like the thorniest set of nuts to crack? Is it the infrastructure, workforce development, building for trust with providers? And then like, as a quick follow-up to that, if we think about building a universal system that gets eventually to a state level, listen, I love me some bureaucracy. And like, I'm an MPA kid, I have faith. And the values that I have heard centered here in Multnomah County, with the thoughtfulness that the county and the folks at the county and the analysis that the county has is bringing to it, I don't know that I have like the most confidence that that gets to 36 counties throughout the state. And like, how can we not lose that like nuance that y'all have brought to it?
The gnarliest. There's so much. I don't mean to say that it's negative. There's just so many things to figure out. You know, workforce is the one, even though folks have said, I want to do this, like, I'll do it, but am I going to have enough staff? I mean, that's constantly, and I'm hearing stories about people running multiple ads and, you know, people not showing up for, you know, the interviews. And, you know, so that's a real thing. That's a real thing, a real issue that we have to address. I see you nodding, you know, it's a thing. And, you know, we have money set aside to really try to figure out how to tackle this in many ways, and looking for ideas. We have things that you've heard of that work, but the workforce one is one, but infrastructure and, you know, providers on their own navigating the city of Portland, you know, trying to get a permit to do some work, very difficult. Very many layers of, you know, asking this person, and then this person doesn't talk to that person, then the fire marshal said one thing and the licensor said one thing, and then I put a set of stairs here and they really should have been over there. That is real. We had a provider who ran into this huge sidewalk issue, which I don't know if you heard about, but you got all the money to do that, and then it was like, oh, and by the way, since you're doing this, you got to put a whole new sidewalk all the way around here, and it just busted our budget. I mean, so these things have happened to me in my own business journey, so I know that they're real. And so we're trying to figure out like this system navigator, right, to help people through these processes, and having the right people in the room to talk through that, you know, and just the architect, the fund. There's just so many things that go along. You'd be surprised at how, you know, I remember, I'll share a personal story. I have a property over in Mississippi, got funding to put a little building, do a land lease with my neighbor who had a commercial site, got all the funds, went down to the city. All of a sudden there was a design overlay, because now Mississippi is a historical street. I added $30,000 to my project, and I had to kill it. I couldn't afford to do that. That was many years ago, but things like that happen, and who's the person to tell you all the things you need to know and how much money you really need to do this? So that's one of the things we're working with to get figure out, what does that navigator position look like, and what can it really do? Is it just walking someone through that? Is it you actually need to see, you know, what does it really look like to get that done? It's a big issue. It really is, you know, from developers who have all the money to do all the stuff up here, but don't have the money down here on the main level to do that. So they don't rent it to childcare because it doesn't look like childcare makes any money. So they rather rent it to another kind of business. So those two things, workforce and infrastructure, are really important.
Yeah, and I mean, imagine trying to navigate all of those systems when you're caring for children for like 12 hours during the business day where all of the offices are open, and right, and or you don't have any additional income to spend. And I mean, it's just like so many barriers. And I do think
is something we've been thinking about too, because we're starting to develop this grants program to help more new providers come online or expand and be able to like hire up and, build a facility. And we just need I think we need to think a lot more about the kinds of navigators that you're talking about that are really just supporting providers at every step through various regulatory, because it's zoning, it's licensing, it's all kinds of stuff at all different levels. Like, how do you actually move through these systems? And that needs to be part of the budget for the system that we're trying to build. We also need to think about in implementation, like not just relying on the state. Like, the state can be working with trusted community partners, as you all are, to be doing outreach, to be supporting families through their process of accessing the program, through supporting providers of different types. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for more state, like more government community partnerships. And I think you all are a good model for like having an advisory committee that is parents and providers and kind of, different community stakeholders who are actually really knowledgeable, because providers know the most about the childcare system of anyone. Like, and they know exactly what's working and not working. Like, they might not have time to come and tell you in Salem, but like, they know, like, this is a broken system. This doesn't work. I'm not getting the information I need. I'm not getting the support I need. So like, having their voices is really instrumental at every step, like from the design through access, and evaluation of the program. So even beyond. So I think there is an advisory body that is like advising the implementation of this, and they're giving real-time feedback. Like, this is what we're seeing when we talk to people and what's working and not working at this stage. And I think we need to encourage more of that at the state, where there's been less of a history of real like community co-governance, which we absolutely need to demand.
Yeah, and just, the state talking to the city, talking to the county when they change major rules. Like, there was a sprinkler gate thing, which, have y'all heard about that one? Where all of a sudden, if you had family childcare, you needed a sprinkler system too. And the licensing didn't even know that the state fire marshal had put this through until someone went down to the city and tried to do something. They were like, well, you need a sprinkler system. It's just like, in my house? So like that should never happen. Like, there's no way that comes out. And the division who really does childcare doesn't know about that until it presents itself as a problem. So like this major siloing there, shocking. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, again, thank you, all of you, for talking about all these things. And I think that the challenges are very clear, and it sounds like we could spend a lot of time talking about that. One thing that would be interesting to hear about is, let's fast forward to, let's say, 2032. Right? So we got a couple years after, like, we're there. Tell me what that looks like. What does that look like for a family, for a provider? Like, paint that picture of where are we going, right? I'd love to hear what that would be like for families then and for providers then.
10 years is when we're supposed to be fully universal. So remember I said that.
How about,
hit the nail
I
on the
give you
head.
2035?
Okay,
right?
okay.
How about 2035?
Okay, I think it looks like a lot of choices and a lot of families having their needs met in multiple ways, providers feeling supported, right? As a system, we're wrapping our arms around them in a real way. But I think it's really, you're gonna see like all of the families in the system have their opportunity for childcare. Childcare and preschool are the same, y'all. Same thing. Have that need met. And it's gonna look different, but everyone's gonna feel like that need has been met. Right, so if it's at night, because I mean, people like, what does it look like to have learning hours and your hours, and someone needs to stay till 9? So like these are kind of the gnarly things that we're talking through, and how do we really express that to someone who's thinking of preschool in this particular lens? So you'll see an example of that by the time that's there in many places and ways. I mean, that's really the journey, but there's so much that needs to happen. But that's the plan. 10 years, we're going to be there.
Yeah, I would love to be in a world, whenever that is, where, families who need it can get it. They can get the thing they want. Like, they can choose. They have actual choices for what kind of care they can choose for their kids. And their kids are in stable, healthy, loving relationships with their parents and providers. And our providers, like, our workforce has grown, and there are people seeking out joining the profession and feeling really valued for the important work that they do. I mean, I hope that's where we're headed. I've been in this work long enough to know that, like,
I'm on the implementation team, so I can say like this team is already asking, how are we going to evaluate ourselves? So the reality 10 years from now is we're going to hopefully have a lot of slots and have a lot of supported providers and have a lot of kids in care and be learning like what is working and what is not working and what needs to be changed and what needs to be improved. And that like really what we're setting up is a system where you're seeking the feedback to be able to be in a like continuous improvement stance, because that's what systems require. There's no static like end point where like, oh, we did it. So it's just going to be, I think, that constant learning process. And I know the leadership of this program is really interested in like seeking out that information to continuously make the program better, serve providers better, fill the gaps that exist, help people navigate the challenges that are outside of the county's control to some degree. So I think there's going to be, like, it's important to kind of hold that too.
Yeah, and we're focusing really, so one of the measures that I'm excited to talk about is like, we're talking about equity and racial social justice, and so we're going to have a tool that measures and looks at the experiences of Black and brown children in classrooms. And so, for example, those, I'm going to speak a little jargon here, so if you do something like an Eckers evaluation, say for you're in there doing that, but someone's going to be watching those interactions with that teacher, and that, boy, it's why did you give this kind of consequence to this child, and this one over here is doing that very same thing, and tell me about that. So people can kind of start unpacking like their behaviors and how they're interacting to children, how they're speaking with families as they come in. Are you greeting them? The kind of things that Black and brown families value, other families value that too. Like, so we're going to be taking some measures to see really what that experience is like, and how do we really inform that teacher where they may need to make an adjustment. So that'll be part of our evaluation. So it's not just talking about racial equity and justice, really like honing in on what is that child's experience in the setting, and how do we adjust and inform the teacher of what to do to make that experience valuable and really affirming for the child. So I'm excited about that. So you'll hear more about the access tool later, but that's what it's called.
Other questions? Keep them coming. I have a question that we didn't get to, but this is kind of on the behind the scenes work of passing Preschool for All, and kind of how did it even end up on the ballot? Can you speak on that?
I can give some information about that. So there was a lot of, I think, community demand and pressure that Commissioner Vega Peterson heard, and she was the kind of primary driver at the county to really start a process with a lot of different community partners and community stakeholders and parents and providers. And it really started with a parent advisory body that was a lot of different parents of color from different culturally specific organizations around town that came together and really started the conversations about, like, what do I want from a preschool system? What would work best for my family? And then that evolved into a sort of task force of a variety of different community partners. So there was a lot of different kind of advocacy organizations and labor unions and schools, like, you know, K-12 superintendents and things like that were at the table with parents and providers to really start answering some questions about, like, we learned a lot about what exists elsewhere, you know, what other systems look like. And then there were a variety of different working groups too that made recommendations back to this group to say, here's what we think we should do around wages, and here's what we think we should do around, you know, like other quality measures and standards and various other things. Yeah.
I was on one of those groups too, and like, do we want to use Eckers? Is that culturally affirming? What does that look like? Or how would we use it if that is the only thing that exists? So like, we really looked at those things and said, do these things make sense for what we're trying to do? Tools that aren't, you know, in multiple languages. Do we want to use that? How do we evaluate someone that's not even their cultural lens or even in their language? Do we throw that out? So we really looked hard at all of those things to come up with what we were going to do.
Yeah, and then the working groups would sort of bring recommendations, because they were the experts in like a particular area of policy, and would bring recommendations back to like this larger group to adopt. And so then we ended up with like a policy framework, and then it transitioned to a campaign team. So then the team kind of changed a little bit, because it was more community-based organizations that have experience working with voters and talking to voters and passing ballot measures. And there was a set of campaign consultants that do ballot measure work and things like that came in and really developed a plan to do outreach and to talk to folks about it and to build the support that we would need. It ended up being something that was referred by the county commission to the ballot for voters to decide. So there was some work with each of the county commissioners to kind of get to alignment around what the common proposal was going to be, and then it went to voters. And there was a lot of, in COVID, like ways to kind of figure out in that first year, like how do we talk to people in this environment where we can't reach anybody in person, and really try to make sure that we're building the support that we need to pass this. And I would say too, like pretty early on in the process, just to speak to the politics of it, there was outreach to a variety of different like business groups, the kinds of folks who might have opposed this tax measure coming to the ballot. And I can't say that like we got to a place where there was none of that, but I think there was less of that because there was more of this kind of outreach early on to say some of the things that you said, Leslie, like this is an investment that we need to make in our whole community, and the wrong people are paying for the consequences of it right now, and we really need to shift how we're doing this, and really trying to like protect against opposition, because something can sound good in general on a poll until a really well-funded opposition effort comes in and tells people stories about the consequences that may or may not be true. And then it looks like a much, much harder campaign. So I think there was like quite a bit of political work done too to make sure that like we weren't going to be facing this really well-funded opposition to this effort at the end of the day. And then it was successful and it passed, and now they're in implementation for the rest of time, really.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for the Center for Women's Leadership for putting this on. As a secondary educator, I appreciate good primary care for the kiddos. One of the things that I was thinking about, which sort of brings it back to both of your questions, was I was thinking about compounding. So 10 years from now, this program is up and running. It's doing what it should be. What are the compounds effects to the community and for these families because of providing childcare for all that may combat well, we don't want to fund this now because X. Well, if you don't fund it now, it's going to cause these issues down the line.
I mean, I'm just thinking like immediately you stop paying, $1,000 a month. What could that do for your ability to buy a home? Well, even in Portland, it's still hard, but, right, helps, right? So just think about those burdens being relieved from folks. Think about not really trying to navigate this crazy system of wait lists and this, that. There's a lot of things that go along with navigating that, on your own. So I think giving some guidance for that, but I think really the financial burden and it's a huge one.
Assessment, like for you guys, like taking that and compounding. Okay, so the family was able to buy a house because of Preschool for All, which then caused this effect, which caused this effect, which caused that effect.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean,
You're appointed to the marketing team. I'm just kidding. I don't have that power.
Right. And you think about things like the Preschool study, which shows that long term. It's like, and some people don't know those are Black children. All the longitudinal studies really are with Black children, and so you think about what they showed that long term investment was for that child's life and their ability to be in college at the end. So we have evidence already that shows that. So I think we can apply that to what this could be as well. Yeah.
We do, and to your point, like it's been in programs where it's sort of like by lottery, like we're not serving to scale. Preschool has these positive impacts in the longer term, but we haven't really measured like what impact does it have on families, on providers, on to really be able to fund the system to scale, and like what kinds of things does it create opportunity to do for all of our different kind of populations of people who are being served by this program. Like there's great research on the impact on kids in the longer term, but we haven't really looked at it more comprehensively because we don't have a lot of models for universal systems that really would help us to understand those kind of global impacts better. Yeah. So this will be a model for figuring out what some of those positive impacts, those kind of compounding impacts are. Yeah.
And one of the things I think people don't about it too is one of the things we looked at is what people need to work. Most folks need more than 6 hours. Most people work longer than 6 hours. So we were able to add a 10-hour day. So we have programs offering a full 10 hours, so 6 hours of preschool and wraparound childcare. I'm saying that facetiously, but but that's powerful. If someone's working 8 hours a day, they're rushing back to pick someone up and taking their child somewhere else. So why not keep them where they're already comfortable and happy? So that's one of the things that we were able to include with our measure as well. Full day childcare.
Any last thoughts before we wrap up this really insightful panel?
Thank you first. I feel like we're on a journey together with all of this. And I think that's why this really worked. We had so many people at the table, PAC as the parent group that was there, and we're still, making sure we're checking in with families. Family voice, has really not been there in any real way in a lot of the systems that have been designed for early learning. So, what are the ways we can do that even more? So ideas, we have a website on the county, so look us up, send information in if you have things that you're curious about. But I think I've told people this publicly, it's kind of a dream job for me. All the things I've done, over my career and life, from a mom navigating that system when I was in the Army with a young baby to adult children, working as a coach, having a small business. It's really a culmination of a lot, working at the state level, like quality rating and improvement. It feels like all of those things come together to, help this whole system. So I'm honored to do the work, and I know it's going to be hard work. It won't be perfect, and we're willing to make adjustment and really have this relationship with the community that I think is unique in government work. So yeah, just thanks again.
Thank you for inviting us. Thanks for coming. I think this is a system that's really open to community feedback and participation, and it's going to work as well as we make it work, right? So it's not just on Leslie to go implement this whole program by herself. She's going to take the feedback that we all provide about how it's working or not working and the ways that we sort of dig in together to make it better over time, because that's how things actually work. So, and I know that there's real openness at the county for that approach and feedback, which is rare. So I think, we all have a role in implementing this well and making sure folks can access it. So let's do it.
Thank you so much, Center for Women's Leadership, and our panelists, and our audience for the great questions. I think we'll still be around, so if you have any last-minute questions, feel free to ask Leslie or Andrea. Thank you so much.